Chapter 7. Queen takes pawn. Zithusula awoke to find himself in what his sense of smell strongly suggested was an infirmary. As his gaze travelled around the large, sterile and nondescript room, a twin set of semicircular, iron-clad doors peeled their way up silently into the ceiling. A Ximmatiri nurse, pushing a trolley out in front of her, briskly scuttled her way in as the doors swiftly slid shut behind her. The nurse's mandibles tilted upwards in a friendly but very practised way, serving only to instantly put the scientist into a state of high alert.
Welcome back to the land of the living. You gave us quite a scare there. Now, please don't take this the wrong way, but just for the record, I don't suppose you could tell me your name, preferably in long form if you would be so kind.
Zithusula took immediate note of the fact the nurse had entered his room almost as soon as he had gained consciousness. Wherever he actually was, they must have been monitoring his condition very closely.
Seriously, my name?
The scientist responded belligerently, doing his level best to feign incredulity.
Am I supposed to believe that you don't actually know who I am?
The nurse just chuckled cheerily.
Oh, we know exactly who you are, believe me. In fact, you just might be one of the most well-known Xicadians on the face of the planet right now. However, you took some nasty concussive damage during your, accident, and we want to make certain your cognitive faculties are all still in good working order, if you will excuse the expression. So if you would just humour me for a moment and provide me with your complete formalised hive name designation, that would be a really great start.
Zithusula offered a cautious reply.
All right. How about this then? I'll agree to answer your questions if you will agree to answer mine. Does that sound like a fair trade to you?
Sounds wonderful.
The nurse replied agreeably.
But unless I'm very much mistaken, I did ask first, so please, if you could provide me with your formal designation, I would be ever so appreciative.
The Jihari scientist let out a slow, relenting sigh.
Designation Zithusula 123. Classification Jihari. Category Scientist Nest Zitalia, Supernest Hymenia. Now my turn. How long have I been out and where exactly is this place? Is it a facility within the Supernest or have I been relocated all the way back to Nest Zitalia?
Great job, Zithusula. And to answer your questions, you've been out for several days now, though mostly by virtue of an induced coma while we waited for the swelling to come down. That's why you have that bandaging. We drilled a few small relief holes into your exoskeleton to ease the pressure, just in case things got worse before they got better, which, thanks Xicadian, they did not. Now then, what is the very last thing that you remember?
Feeling mildly irritated, she had in fact only answered one of his questions. Zithusula attempted to lift himself up from the bed table, but quickly found that he could not. He immediately became acutely aware of his weakened condition and arrived at the rather shocking discovery: 2 of his legs were missing.
By the shadow of Xicadian, 2 of my legs are gone.
Now, Zithusula, please just try to remain calm. I'm incredibly sorry, but yes, we lost 2 legs and we actually came pretty close to losing a 3rd. Believe me, we tried our very best to save them. However, the damage was simply too great, so very sadly they had to go. And just in case you have not already noticed, I should probably also point out that you have lost 3 of your eyes. So yes, I'm afraid that you are going to have to learn to adapt to life without full 270-degree vision. The good news, however, is that none of them were consecutive in order, so the visual gaps will only be relatively minor.
Zithusula decided the nurse sounded just a little too sympathetic to be entirely believable. After all, she was clearly not a hive mother, as she lacked the telltale antennae.
You know, it has just now occurred to me that you have not yet told me your name,
the scientist said, very pointedly.
Well, how very rude of me. Please, just call me Zamima.
That's a little bit vague, don't you think? I can well imagine that there must be hundreds of Zamimas currently in active service, so at the very least, providing me with your serial number seems like a simple common courtesy, yes?
Zamima started to click apologetically as she nudged the trolley a little closer to the bed.
Unfortunately, Zethusela, I'm simply not authorized to share that kind of information with you. I really do wish that I could, believe me. That said, you might be very surprised to learn that not all Z-Materie lines are hatched in bulk, and I'm not just talking about obvious exceptions like Hymanthea either. But let's try not to get ourselves all worked up over nothing, yes? Like I was just in the middle of telling you before, as horrible as these injuries may seem to you right now, please believe me that these are only relatively minor disabilities in the grand scheme of things. I think you will be surprised at just how quickly you are able to adapt and return back to a mostly normal life. Mostly.
Zethusela did not at all appreciate the way she had said the word mostly.
And, as you no doubt already know, the Xicadian physiology is remarkably resilient. In point of fact, neuromechanical limbs can, in certain respects, be even better than the real thing. So there are plenty of good reasons, are there not, to stay positive.
Zemima now softened her voice, as if doing so would somehow lessen the blow of what she was about to say next.
Of course, your injuries will rule out any possibility of your return to the Rangers, as there are specific physical and medical requirements, which sadly you will no longer be able to meet. Very unfair if you ask me, but unfortunately we don't get to make the rules.
Well, there it was, Zethusela thought despairingly. There could no longer be any lingering doubt as to where this facility was, or more to the point, who it actually belonged to. Not that it should have come as any great surprise to begin with, but still, he would have far preferred to have found himself in the much more neutral grounds of the Grand Palace. Despite his darkening mood, or perhaps even because of it, the nurse maintained her implacably positive demeanour.
But let's not dwell on the past, as I think your future prospects now look almost undeservedly bright. As I have already alluded to, bioprosthetic technology has advanced so dramatically since the postmodern space era began that your mobility will hardly be impinged at all. No, with rudimentary integration into your nervous system, I am reliably informed you will actually be able to sense the presence of your artificial limbs, almost as if they were an intrinsic part of your body.
Zethusela, who had stubbornly persisted, making sporadic attempts to stand himself up, finally gave up the effort, allowing himself to slump heavily back into his cushioned bed table, his remaining 7 limbs now draped wearily over the gently curved edges of the bed. And Zemima, apparently either oblivious of or completely unconcerned with his struggle, continued to speak with a patronising tone.
Now, please do try to keep things in perspective, Zethusela. The word on Xicades is that one of the outer colonies chose to go fully bioprosthetic for all 6 of their non-digit limbs, due primarily to the significantly higher gravitational field of their new home planet. Yet as crazy as that may sound, believe me, it gets even better.
The nurse's voice now became distinctly conspiratorial.
Leaked documents picked up on the extrasolar newscasts strongly suggest that their biotech engineers are currently working very hard to alter their genetic base code, such that their future generations will hatch with only their 3 forelimbs intact, apparently simply in order to save them the hassle of statutory amputation.
Zemima offered a performative shrug of perplexed confusion, as if to concede just how alien the behaviour of some Xicadian off-worlders had apparently become. Zethusela, still feeling strangely fatigued from his previous efforts just to stand himself up, reluctantly acknowledged to himself he should probably be very grateful he still had all 3 of his forelimbs intact.
Now, please do correct me if I am mistaken, but I believe that you were just about to start telling me the very last thing you remembered doing before you blacked out.
Oh, was I really?
The scientist replied, sounding genuinely confused. The bottom line was he needed more time to think. The timely appearance of this interrogator, sloppily disguised as a so-called nurse, strongly suggested Xitalia was interested in much more than simply exacting her revenge. It seemed increasingly likely then she still hoped to manipulate and coerce him back into her artificial intelligence program. That could only mean she was now sufficiently convinced he had made a significant technological breakthrough, which evidently made negotiating still worth the effort. No doubt, were the softly approach to fail, Xitalia would resort to good old-fashioned torture to see what she could extract from him before exterminating his life with extreme prejudice. Assuming he was actually reading the situation correctly, then he still held potentially significant bargaining power, and, ironically enough, Zemima might actually be right. His future may yet possess untapped potential, though perhaps not quite in the way she might have intended. The stakes, then, were still very high, and he had to proceed with a great deal of caution. Rule number 1. Don't lie about anything that you don't need to lie about.
Well, now let me think.
Zithusela said innocently, as if making a genuine attempt to search his memory.
I vaguely recall being unable to move with my face pressed into the dirt as a large mesaline starfly landed on my helmet. That is literally the last thing I remember before waking up here, wherever here actually is.
A mesaline starfly really had landed on his helmet shortly before he passed out. Who knows? Perhaps it had been attracted by all the blood and carnage and had simply been looking for an easy meal. Regardless, the nurse seemed happy enough with his answer.
Okay, good job, Zithusela. Now then, what about the events directly leading up to that moment?
The scientist said nothing while he continued to collect his thoughts. This so-called nurse was clearly just here to pump him for information, and maybe even to try and catch him in a lie. He had to play this very carefully, by claiming he was feeling disorientated and that it was still all a bit of a fog. That way, if he should contradict himself, he could just blame it on his general grogginess and malaise. The key was to be consistently vague, ambiguous, and unsure, so any lies could hide safely within the truth that surrounded them.
Now let me think. I believe that I was out on my regular patrol. I'm not exactly sure I can recall who I was rostered with for that particular shift. It could have been Xicadian, as we did get paired together quite regularly, due to the simple fact that we were both from Nest Zitalia. But honestly, I couldn't say for sure, as I may well just be getting my days mixed up.
Wonderful, and please don't worry yourself. I think you are doing great. Very interesting you should mention Xicadian. I would strongly encourage you to see what else, if anything, you can remember about what might have happened to him. Go ahead and just tell me whatever comes into your mind next. It's funny how the truth has a way of forcing itself to the surface, even when the mind tries to hold it back.
Zemima leaned in tightly.
Rest assured, I remain supremely confident that the full picture will inevitably reveal itself.
The scientist could not quite escape the feeling that the nurse was somehow eagerly inviting him to dig his own grave.
Now hold up for just a moment, Zemima. What exactly did you mean by happen to him? Did something actually happen to Xicadian? I genuinely thought that was nothing but a terrible dream.
Just a poor choice of words. But please, I would very much appreciate it if you could tell me more about the ultimate fate of your shift companion.
Another poor choice of words, Zithusela thought to himself despondently. Is she just playing with me?
Well, I do seem to vaguely recall receiving a general proximity alert. Unauthorized access to the reserve, but no information of who, how many, or where. If this actually did happen, then I have to say, such an event would be extraordinarily unusual. Completely unique in point of fact, which is perhaps why I'm actually able to remember it. You need to understand, Zemima. The automated systems are run by proto-sentient, self-diagnosing, self-correcting, autonomously healing, fourth-generation AI, layered on top of multiple redundant backup systems. Faults like that just don't happen anymore, and you would have to go back more than 2 millennia to find any similar real-world examples.
Zethusela was very careful not to offer any opinion as to what he thought the implications of such a scenario might be. It was crucially important to walk the fine line between plausible naivety born from a life of unfettered privilege and unrealistic stupidity. He was Xihari, after all. Zemima stared at the Xihari scientist with a penetrating gaze.
Oh my goodness, that sounds terribly complicated, and that's putting it mildly. Well, I suppose that someone with your particular expertise would know a lot more about that type of technology than a humble Ximatairi nurse. But nonetheless, I'd very much like to learn exactly how you decided to deal with such an unusual situation. Please do feel free to enlighten me.
Zemima placed a reassuring hand onto Zethusela's thorax.
No pressure though, just take a deep breath and then tell me whatever comes into your mind.
The scientist, finding her touch to be anything but reassuring, fought hard to maintain his composure.
Well, let me see. Given that an anomaly like this should actually never happen, and was thus not covered in our formal training, I seem to recall that I became extremely stressed. In fact, to put it bluntly, I believe that I just flat out panicked, which would explain why my memories on this matter feel so fragmented and confused.
Zethusela laid one of his own hands on top of the nurse's and stared into her eyes with what he very much hoped was a convincing look of pleading vulnerability.
Please, Zemima, I'm actually finding it excruciatingly hard to disentangle what was real from my own distorted nightmares. I need you to understand that I take my role as a ranger extremely seriously. Some might even be inclined to say too seriously, but I guess that is just the way I was built.
Your ex-role.
The nurse said flatly, as she frostily removed his hand from hers.
But I understand exactly what you mean, and I'm sure you were only doing what you thought to be in the best interests of the sanctuary.
We can play this game all day, Zethusela thought to himself wryly.
My ex-role.
The scientist willingly conceded.
So, as I was in the middle of saying, I must confess that I have a haunting concern that I may or may not have decided to do something desperately foolish. But who can say for sure? After all, it may all be nothing more than half-remembered fever dreams.
That's perfectly all right,
the nurse said with a seemingly endless supply of patience.
I want you to try and think of this as your safe space. I promise you there's no judgment to be found here. All we're trying to do is uncover the truth. And you do want to uncover the truth, don't you, Zethusela?
Well, to the best of my recollection, which I think we both know isn't exactly saying very much, I believe that in the heat of the moment, I may have engaged a number of, shall we say, custom modifications to my combat suit's AI algorithms to aid me in getting to the bottom of this deeply perplexing emergency. No doubt it seemed more than reasonable at the time, but with the wisdom of hindsight, looks rather embarrassingly reckless.
Zemima's expression became almost comically sympathetic.
Well, given your background as an expert in artificial intelligence research, I'm sure anyone with your level of technical capabilities would have decided to do exactly the same thing in a situation as extraordinary as that which you inadvertently found yourself in, and through absolutely no fault of your own, I might hasten to add. So tell me, were these, custom modifications as useful as you had hoped them to be?
Well, yes and no.
The scientist replied emphatically, attempting to sound as uselessly ambiguous as arachnically possible.
I think what I'm trying to say here is that I suspect that the custom modifications did indeed aid me in better assessing and managing the situation at hand. But I was nonetheless more than just a little bit disappointed by the reality of the unexpected limitations that my enhanced AI technologies offered in the uncompromising crucible of an impromptu no-holds-barred field test.
Let's see her try and piece that meaningless word salad of a jigsaw puzzle back together. The scientist thought to himself smugly as he lapsed into innocent silence. Zamima waited for an uncomfortably long moment before responding.
I couldn't help but notice that you used the word management, so perhaps we can try and zoom in on what that actually means in more practical terms. I'll give you a little starter for 9 Zithusula. As shocking as this may sound, there were in fact quite a number of fatalities involved during the incident at the sanctuary, including the tragic loss of your shift companion, Xicadian 7923. So any recollection then, as to how your so-called custom enhancements may or may not have contributed to so much unnecessary wanton violence?
Nothing springs to mind.
The scientist replied flatly.
The problem is, Zamima, that I simply don't trust my memory well enough to be confident of anything I have either already said or might yet come to say in relationship to this terrible incident. I am very curious, though. Did the Zilaneti Queen actually survive? After all, when all else is said and done, surely that is what truly matters the most.
Ah yes, the Wasp Queen,
Zamima intoned agreeably, as if something of profound importance had just been brought to her attention.
What if I were to tell you that the Supernest's public media outreach program has you trending as a postmodern ecological hero? Might that help jog your memory a little?
The Zihari scientist's mandibles began to gape wordlessly.
I think you might be very happy to learn, Zithusula, that Nest Zitalia is getting a tremendous reputation boost out of the incident on the sanctuary. More to the point, though, how you dealt with those unknown eco-terrorists, because that is what the cleanup team actually discovered them to be, means that you are now destined to be remembered by history, right alongside the all-time greats, such as Eumodian 97, and the elder queen of legend Timogentia. May her soul rest in peace.
The nurse now patted the scientist's thorax in an act of performative reassurance.
So please, breathe easy, Zithusula. You really don't have anything at all to worry about. Just say whatever comes into your mind and let me do all the deciding about what is fact and what is fiction.
The scientist felt momentarily stunned. Being framed as an ecological hero was one particular scenario that had genuinely never crossed his mind. He had to hand it to Zitalia. She was an innovative problem solver. But it did not necessarily follow he was now going to get out of this alive, or whether he would even want to. Still, his mind had immediately been set to racing as the fragments of a brand new plan began to rapidly assemble themselves into a semi-coherent strategy. Zithusula's resolve finally began to crumble. Or at least that is how he very much hoped it appeared, as he proceeded to willingly walk the nurse through most of the events pretty much as they happened, minus 2 key facts. No mention of the suit's quantum mesh artificial intelligence, aka Xeon, essentially running the whole show, and no mention of Xicadian's betrayal, nor his rather revealing victory speech. When Zithusula finally finished recounting his harrowing experience, the nurse said nothing for a very long time, and just stared at him as if weighing him up very carefully. He could not escape the unsettling feeling that his fate now lay in the palm of her hand. Eventually she sat herself up straight, apparently at last arriving at a decision.
Incredible. Just incredible what you managed to do in order to save our precious Zilaneti Queen. You must feel very proud. Well, I certainly hope that you do anyway. I think it is safe to say that this nest, and the whole of Xicadia for that matter, would not be in the mess it is in today, if it only had more Zihari arachnids of your caliber conviction.
The nurse paused briefly, moving her face very close to his.
And honesty.
Zithusula continued to hold the nurse's gaze without flinching, and Zamima's immutably civil expression finally gave way to one of malignant contempt.
Well, as much as I might have wished it, I don't get to decide your ultimate fate. No, rather, fortunately for you, the best I can do is offer a strong recommendation, but rest assured, Zethusela, that's exactly what I intend to do.
Zemima, reassembling her mask of civility, positioned the trolley close to Zethusela's face, revealing a bottle labelled protein paste and a plate of what looked like jellied bloodworm. She pushed a straw into the head of the bottle and gently placed it between his mandibles.
Please, Zethusela, go ahead and finish up your meal and then get some rest. We need to get you strong and back up on your feet. You have a very special visitor waiting to see you, and she is rather eager to talk to you about your future. But don't worry about that just now. Take all the time you need and focus on getting better. After all, that's what really matters the most, isn't it? The whole of Xicadia wants to know if you are going to recover, so it would be a great shame indeed if all we found ourselves left with was just another dead martyr.
The nurse now silently left the room as the lighting began to auto-dim. Zethusela started to suck gloomily on his paste. He decided he liked it much better when his adversaries just used good old-fashioned pulse guns, even if they did decide to shoot him in the back with them. Zethusela hovered his way through a deep and featureless canyon, his giant wasp-like wings beating frantically in a desperate effort to keep him airborne. A Xylonetti queen in obvious distress flew very unsteadily alongside him. For reasons that appeared to defy the laws of physics, they both struggled to maintain an altitude much above 20 meters, as any higher than that, the atmosphere inexplicably thinned out into a virtual vacuum. From the valley below, a swarming mass of Ximotiri warriors hurled a seemingly endless barrage of crude wooden spears, while they continued to hover their way towards a mountainside cave. Zethusela did everything he could to try and protect the queen by shielding her with his own body, but as a result, his thorax was covered in weeping and bloodied pockmarks from the many spears that had managed to penetrate the hard keratinous shell of his carapace. The sanctuary of the cave loomed ever closer, and for the smallest moment, Zethusela started to believe they just might make it. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, one of the spears lanced into the neck of the queen, its tip exploding out of the side of her head. In one last-ditch effort, he attempted to grasp hold of the giant queen with his 3 forelimbs, and was immediately staggered by her immense weight. Unwilling to let her fall, his wings began to beat fiercely as he desperately fought to maintain altitude. Determined not to let go, his 3 forelimbs, unable to sustain the load, spontaneously tore away from their sockets. The lifeless Xylonetti queen fell heavily towards the canyon floor, his limbs still attached to her body. As she crashed into the valley floor below, Zethusela cried out in horrified agony.
"Bad dream?"
Queen Zitalia asked curiously, as her eyes peered searchingly into Zethusela's traumatized and confused-looking face. The scientist blinked hard and decided to remain stoically silent, at least until he had managed to figure out if he was truly awake, or whether this was still just another part of the horrific nightmare unfolding.
"Well, bad dreams or not, I'm pleased to see you're looking so much better. You had me a little worried there for a while. Your attending nurse has of course fully briefed me, regarding your accounting of the incident that occurred on my sanctuary.
The Supernest Sanctuary.
Zethusela corrected her irritably. However, Xitalia just nodded agreeably.
Yes, well, I have to admit I was more than a little bit curious as to what you would actually say, or perhaps more to the point what you would not say in your formal recounting of the events that took place on my sanctuary.
The scientist sighed heavily but did not try to further argue the point.
Now, I do appreciate that we have not exactly seen eye to eye regarding the direction of your career, but a small part of me, a naive part I'll grant you, had hoped that you may nevertheless have been a little more forthcoming and told us everything about that rather fateful day. After all, it's not as if you have anything to be ashamed of, with such a heroic effort now part of the public record.
The Queen's voice now softened, if only ever so slightly.
But the truth of the matter is, I do understand. Trust is a two-way tunnel, and I am not completely without sympathy regarding your generally dim view of our species. You might be very surprised to learn that in many respects I agree entirely with your pessimism. But there is a very fine line between pessimism and cynicism. What I need from you now is to be given the opportunity to prove you wrong. I need you to take a chance on me and on the future of our entire species by choosing to become an essential part of our future.
The Queen gestured casually towards the main door behind her.
Now I want to show you something that I think you might find very interesting.
Zemima silently wheeled in a small operating table with what appeared to be a dead mesaline starfly laid out on top of it.
Recognize this?
The Queen asked with a perfunctory nod. Zethusela briefly flicked his eyes towards the small table, but remained stone-faced and silent.
Well, of course you do. I think you may even have mentioned its presence during your debrief. You may also be aware that I have a very aggressive program in the field of biotech research. It turns out that this mesaline starfly's optical and audio receptors have a neural link to what I believe they call a biocarbon nanomemory aggregator. At least I think that's the term they used. Anyway, it pretty much records nearly everything it sees and hears. And let me tell you plainly, Zethusela, it sees and hears a lot.
The Shihari scientist, now feeling like a Xicadian razorbug backed into a corner, did what all razorbugs would do in a situation like this, and went on the attack.
Well, how brilliantly devious of you, Xitalia. I imagine that you must be feeling very proud of yourself. Too bad, then, that it really doesn't matter what you think you have learnt from that highly illegal spying device of yours. I seriously doubt that the other member Celestial Queens would be particularly happy to learn that you've been planting this kind of clandestine tech in a jointly owned and governed reserve, subject to a strict global charter of laws and regulations. Who knows how many Himagentia Accords you have violated with such a deceitful abuse of technology?
The Queen smiled coldly.
Ah, yes, abuse of technology, something I believe you yourself just might know a thing or two about. Am I right, Zethusela?
Despite her devastating rebuke, the scientist remained bravely defiant.
Yes, well, by exposing me, you would also risk exposing yourself in the process. An especially bad look, given your exalted status as an elder Celestial Queen. It really would be quite the scandal, wouldn't it? And let's not forget, I'm an eco-hero now, a Xihari icon ripe for exploitation as a public relations bonanza, and that is something you surely wouldn't want to go to waste.
Zethusela sneered at the Queen acidically, but he did not feel anywhere near as confident as he was desperately trying to portray. The truth of the matter was, dead martyrs were, generally speaking, much easier to control than alive ones. Even so, he still had a hand to play. After all, she hadn't killed him for a very good reason.
No, the bottom line is going public with this will hurt you far more than it will me. Not that I care even if you do, because I will not be coerced into working for you or sharing my latest discovery. A discovery, I might add, of truly monumental proportions.
The trap has been laid, Zethusela thought to himself desperately. Now all you have to do is take the bait.
Please do let me know, won't you, when you have finally finished feeling sorry for yourself.
Xitalia replied contemptuously, sounding almost bored.
I think you mean sorry for you. And believe me, I'm just getting started. Why am I not even a little surprised this new biotech involves the wholesale exploitation and slaughter of yet another endangered species? No, I'd rather die as a martyr than become just another one of an endless line of your Shihari puppets. Is that truthful enough for you, Xitalia?
Jefusela could feel himself starting to crack from the inside out. He held a very weak hand, and he knew it. His desperate gambit to try and bluff his way to an unrealistically high starting bid, should he end up having any wiggle room for negotiating, was now primed to backfire spectacularly. He waited for what felt like an eternity for the Queen to respond, while contemplating the myriad of truly horrific ways she could end his life. Xitalia slowly drew her face closer to his, as the scientist made a supreme effort not to flinch.
Well, it's a very good start, so let's cut to the chase, shall we? Yes, it was I, the terrible Queen Xitalia, who set up the kidnap and ransom attempt of the Xylinetti Queen. And yes, I get that you have already figured that much out for yourself. But now that it's out in the open, maybe we can both finally get past these endlessly silly games of petty recrimination and start actually trying to find some common ground.
The scientist repressed a powerful surge of elation, while Xitalia slowly drew back, a look of genuine regret spreading inexorably across her face.
It really should go without saying that it wasn't supposed to go down like that. You were simply meant to be disgraced by losing the Xylinetti Queen on your watch. After being dismissed from your position with the Rangers, I would get you safely back to Nest Xitalia, where you have always truly belonged.
The Queen's eyes suddenly went narrow.
Now don't try to deny it. You have made some sort of significant breakthrough during the time you spent with Dr. Xicadian, even if you have so far kept that discovery completely to yourself, or so you may have thought anyway.
Xitalia sighed heavily before continuing.
Now you can keep lying to yourself if you want to, Xithusela. But as laudable as the Rangers may be, for you to be doing anything else other than artificial intelligence research would be nothing less than a complete and utter waste of your potential. I don't want to see you throw your life away like this, simply because you despise your own species so blindly that you will apparently no longer even try to make a difference. We need to get past your bitterness, hatred, and self-loathing, so that we might yet negotiate our way to an understanding that we can both stick to, live with, and most importantly of all, trust in.
The Queen paused briefly in an apparent attempt to collect her thoughts and regain her composure.
But evidently I vastly underestimated your resourcefulness, while simultaneously overestimating the competency of my agents. They should never have been carrying projectile weapons to begin with. I never authorized that, and the orders I gave were crystal clear. Under no circumstances were you to be harmed. As for Xicadian, had you, or should I say your AI, not taken him out, then I most certainly would have done so myself, except I would have taken a lot more time doing it. So you probably did him a favor. Now thanks to that little starfly over there.
Xitalia gestured towards the small medical table.
I got to see exactly how that minor catastrophe on my sanctuary really played out, much to my considerable dismay.
The Queen now peered probingly into the scientist's eyes, as if attempting to divine his true thoughts.
So here we find ourselves then. A newly minted Shihari hero and some much-needed extra credibility for Nest Xitalia. All things considered, this chaotic mess really didn't turn out so badly after all, now did it? Allow me to lay all my cards on the table, Xithusela. Despite Zamima's strong recommendation, I want you back on the artificial intelligence program now more than ever, and I'm willing to meet you halfway. I'm here to negotiate openly and honestly with one of the most stubborn but brilliant Shihari scientists I've surely ever given rise to. Name your terms, and then let's see if we can find a way forward that works for both of us, with no more needless lies or deception getting in the way. All I need is for you to accept the truce that I'm offering, so that we might at long last find a way to make peace between us."
Zethusela's mind raced fiercely as he weighed up both the situation at hand and his very limited range of options. Yes, she had taken the bait, but reeling her in was going to take a lot of skillful finessing. Nonetheless, he never imagined such a frank exchange of views with the Queen, and could not help but feel that in some twisted sort of way she had actually shown him a certain measure of respect, albeit the type strictly reserved only for those seated at opposite ends of the negotiating table. He did, however, hold one rather significant advantage. She thought she knew everything, or at least something very close to it, and in that she could not have been more wrong. All he had to do now was act like there was nothing left for him to hide, and his true secret would be safer now than it had ever been before. Speaking of which, her misplaced faith in Dr. Xicadian's loyalty was a monumental flaw in her perception of reality. Why could she not see it? Perhaps the rumours regarding his origin were true after all. Against all odds, everything was coming together better than he could possibly have hoped for, and he could not help but congratulate himself on his breathtakingly audacious new plan. A plan which had quite literally spontaneously assembled itself as he had stared down the barrel of his own demise. He had to concede, however, if he ever wanted to realise this ambitious new goal, then doing it with Xitalia's unwitting assistance and endorsement was now the only even remotely realistic way forward. No, for better or worse, their fates were now inextricably entwined. The harsh reality was, with his newfound physical disabilities, the Rangers would no longer have a place for him, and as such, the largely autonomous access to resources via the supernest would all be gone as well. The bottom line was, he no longer had a life worth living, unless it was to continue with his secretive new objectives while keeping them hidden in plain sight. A very dangerous game, but one that also offered potentially incomprehensible rewards, assuming, of course, Dr. Xicadian was still willing to play ball. Unfortunately, that was far from certain, given the scientist's demonstrable lack of honesty. As Zethusela confronted the ugly truth of his own grandiose ambitions, he could not help but feel some measure of shame. The wheels had been set in motion, and his subconscious mind had already made its decision. All he was really doing now was acknowledging the fact of it. Talk about the illusion of free will, he thought to himself wryly. Well, free will or not, this really was a most unexpected opportunity for him to gain the upper hand in an otherwise hopeless battle of wits, and against a vastly superior foe. Maybe, despite all appearances to the contrary, it was actually Queen Xitalia who was the one out of her depth here, and didn't fully comprehend just what she was getting herself into. From the Queen's naively simplistic perspective, AI was just another technological artifact to be exploited. But he knew the true picture was something far more dangerous than that. Xitalia was not on the firm ground she supposed herself to be on. So it seemed then this was the perfect time for him to make his final play.
All right, Xitalia, have it your way. Let's try negotiating.
Zethusela said belligerently, trying his level best to exude an air of arrogant entitlement he most definitely did not feel.
For starters, I want to select my own team of researchers. We need arachnids who are willing to take risks, and you have to accept that sometimes, most of the time in fact, things don't always go to plan. In this particular field of endeavour, the path to success is nearly always lined with failure, and I need you to back me all the way, even when things go wrong, which I can assure you they most certainly will. Next, I need Dr. Xicadian, whether he likes it or not, to be available as an ongoing consultant. You were indeed correct in your suspicion he was a witless conspirator with regards to my most recent breakthrough, a new proposed artificial brain substrate I have chosen to call mesh quantum brain technology. But you already knew that, didn't you? I believe his knowledge of biological neurology will continue to be pivotal in aiding me to advance my own work.
Zethusela did his level best to emote a take-it-or-leave-it demeanour. In reality, however, Dr. Xicadian simply had to be on board, or this whole thing was over before it had even begun. He fought to hold his nerve and waited impassively for the Queen to react to his demands.
See, we are negotiating. I'll give you everything that you want, Zethusela, apart from one small thing.
And what exactly might that be?
Zethusela asked indignantly as his heart leapt into his mouth.
You are free to pick your own team without any interference from me. However, I absolutely insist that Dr. Xicadian acts as a senior technical leader, second only to yourself. I would have to imagine you intended to have her on board anyway. Given her track record, and it seems you yourself have tried to credit some of her research with your latest discoveries, even if that was perhaps, shall we say, a slight embellishment of the truth.
Xifusela felt another sudden rush of elation, but again tried his best to conceal it. He would, indeed, have included Xicilla on the team, though not perhaps as his team leader. The fact Xitalia specifically wanted her on board told him he would have to watch her very carefully. So all the Queen had really succeeded in doing was to warn him of who to be wary of. And Xicilla was, after all, a Ximetiri. So this was an openly progressive move that sent the right sort of message that times were finally changing. The scientist remained silent for a small moment, in order to create the impression that he was actually making a decision.
All right, Xitalia, I'm in. Assuming that is you actually stay true to your word.
The Queen's mandibles twitched sharply upwards, signifying her unabashed satisfaction.
Well, very good then, but please understand that while I fully intend to give you the leeway and autonomy you so obviously crave, your efforts will still ultimately have to be consistent with my own long-term vision. We need the sort of artificial intelligence that can help us do better with the tech we already have. I want antimatter engines that are faster, more efficient, and can further extend our reach into the cosmos. I note with some interest that you mentioned Dr. Xicadian. Well, it just so happens that the good doctor has an old and stagnant research project related to stasis technology that I would very much like to see resurrected, and your apparent quantum leap forward in the field of AI might actually allow him to return to that research. After all, we are long overdue a breakthrough in relation to that particular biotech. I'm sure you would agree.
Xitalia now took on a stern but motherly expression.
The bottom line is, I want next-generation smart drone technology that can spearhead the colony's push into the frontiers of interstellar space. From the hunt for our next homeworld to automated, autonomous navigation systems, we need artificial intelligence tech capable of doing things far better than any Xicadian arachnid, no matter how well augmented, could ever dream of. Now then, given the considerable risk I've taken in order to get you back, it should go without saying that I expect you to deliver on all of my stated goals. In fact, I'm betting the future of our nest on it. I'm fully committed to this ambitious little enterprise of ours. But there is one small caveat that still needs to be addressed.
Another one?
Zethusela replied belligerently.
Well, it appears your, shall we say, augmented custom combat suit had a hand in violating the primary protocols, and in the most fundamental way possible. Now, don't get me wrong, this is not a veiled threat. I assure you that your secret will remain safe, with me. But nothing even remotely like this can ever happen again, not while you are involved with a legitimate and publicly audited artificial intelligence program.
Legitimate? You mean like that dead Messaline starfly laid out on that surgical table over there, perhaps?
The Queen's expression lit up with a flash of unconstrained rage, which was gone almost as quickly as it had appeared.
What I mean, Zethusela, is if it ever became public knowledge that an autonomous artificial intelligence unit had a hand in killing Xicadian arachnids, it almost certainly spells the end of progress for your particular field of research for the next millennia to come. And that would, of course, also spell the end for your continued usefulness at Nest Xitalia, which would be a great shame indeed for all invested parties, would it not? The bottom line is, you will be fully audited by the Xicadian Artificial Intelligence Safety and Ethics Bureau, and the operation will be 100% legitimate. Now, do we have an understanding?
Zethusela, immediately recognizing this was not yet a done deal, tried to strike up a more conciliatory tone.
The death of your agents was deeply regrettable, and I have to concede that I need to share some of the blame for that excessively violent confrontation. I must also acknowledge that you have been surprisingly frank, and in a way that I would not have previously imagined you capable of. So given the circumstances that I now find myself in, I for one am willing to move forward from here, in good faith. So yes, my Queen, we have an understanding. I promise to play by the rules, even the demonstrably archaic ones, such as those that pertain to the primary protocols.
Let's just leave the primary protocols in Xicila's more than capable hands, shall we?
Xitalia said, with a distinct air of finality. The Queen now eyed the scientist suspiciously for a very long moment, before faintly nodding towards the motionless starfly.
I think you might be very surprised to learn that Messaline starfly over there isn't actually dead, but rather just heavily sedated. It will be returned to my sanctuary in order to recommence active duties just as soon as it is deemed fit to do so. Like I said, trust is a two-way tunnel, so how about this then? I'll keep your secrets, and in return you can keep mine. Now, do we have a deal?
Xitalia's mandibles tilted upwards in a very practised way, and although it was almost certainly not the desired effect, Zethusela suddenly felt very unsure as to who was playing who. But then again, under the circumstances, what other choice did he really have? The Queen continued to watch him very closely, and he felt almost certain she could somehow hear him thinking.
Absolutely, my Queen, the deal has been struck, and may we both get exactly what we deserve.
Xitalia gave the scientist an unreadable look.
Well, good enough for now, I suppose. So unless there is anything else you wish to discuss, I think I'll leave you to get some rest. And when you feel ready, we can talk about getting your new research team up and running.
The Queen now positioned her mandibles next to Zethusela's ear.
Just a little reminder, no one ever betrays me more than once, not if they want to keep living. And you do want to keep living, don't you, Zethusela?
I do, my Queen.
The Xihari scientist replied somberly, as he allowed himself to sink back heavily onto his bed. He suddenly felt very tired, but nonetheless a good deal happier than he had done when he first woke up. Just maybe things might actually work out. Well, just maybe. As Xitalia wordlessly left the room, she wondered why in Xycadia these short-lived, if admittedly brilliant, Zihari children always thought they could somehow outsmart her, as if they were the first to have ever thought of trying it. If they were supposed to be so damn clever, why couldn't they figure out that someone of her immense age had already seen every trick in the book many times over? She could not help but laugh at his absurdly transparent attempts to feign sincerity. It was almost comically clear he was motivated purely by his own secretive agenda. But it really didn't matter, just so long as they both essentially wanted the same thing: a fifth-generation Zybot. Well, as painfully tedious as the situation undoubtedly was, sometimes you just had to suck it up and make sacrifices in order to keep your eyes firmly glued to the prize. Let Zithusula continue to believe that he still had some small measure of control over the situation. Stroking his overinflated ego, if that was what it took, was perfectly fine with her. In the end, it always played out the same way, with her taking from him what truly belonged to the nest. And when finally he had nothing left worth taking, she would happily dispose of the useless and troublesome husk that was left behind. He had been right, of course. That Mezzaline starfly was as dead as a bloodworm gone through a blender. But her deceit went far deeper than that. With a mild sense of amusement, she could not help but wonder what he might think were he to learn his 2 amputated legs and 3 hollowed-out eyes were not the result of any injury he had sustained, but of a carefully reformulated Plan B. Perhaps she might even tell him the truth one day, just moments before his death, so she could actually find out. Xitalia quickly chastised herself for contemplating such petty vengeance. He may well be a treacherous and unworthy Zihari child, but such behaviour was beneath her. She was, after all, a queen.